The news of my father's death was met not with sympathy, but with a snarl from my mother-in-law. "Break her leg if you have to," she hissed at her son, my husband. "She is not leaving this house." And my husband, the man who had been my everything for the past 4 years, did not break my leg. He did something far crueler. As I screamed, he dragged me down the stairs and threw me into our damp, musty basement, locking the door behind him. He ignored my desperate cries, my frantic pleas. He imprisoned me, all to prevent me from saying a final goodbye to my own father. But they didn't know. In that suffocating darkness, amidst the tearing pain, I saw my son's small feet through the crack under the door, and with a single, desperate whisper, I set in motion a plan that would bring their entire family to their knees before me, begging for a forgiveness they would never receive. Hello, this is Family Stories, and I am Sarah Thompson. I'm here today to tell you my story. Is there any pain greater than losing the person you love most in the world? And is there any humiliation deeper than being treated worse than an animal by the man who vowed to spend his life with you? On that day, I was forced to endure both at once. They must have thought that because I was a quiet woman from a small town in Ohio, I could be easily crushed. They were wrong. Their cruelty that day didn't just push me into hell. It was the key they used to unlock the gates of hell for themselves. To understand the depth of my rage and pain, you first need to understand about my father. My mother passed away when I was very young, leaving me to be raised by him alone. To me, he was the entire world. A retired high school history teacher, he lived a simple, honorable life in our small town. We weren't wealthy by any means, but he poured every ounce of his love into me, working tirelessly to ensure I had a good education and a happy childhood. Our bond was deeper than any other. 4 years ago, I married Michael Miller. He was an ordinary office worker, a kind and seemingly sincere man. I fell in love with him, purely and without calculation. When I first introduced him to my father, my dad had only one request. "As long as he treats you well, Sarah, that's all I could ever ask for." But my marriage was not the beautiful life I had imagined. We lived in a cramped apartment in Queens with his mother, Patricia, and his younger sister, Jessica. From the very first day I moved in as a daughter-in-law, I felt their disdain. They saw me as a country bumpkin, barely worthy of their notice. They believed I had hit the jackpot just by marrying Michael, a New York City man. For 4 years, I endured everything. From cooking and cleaning to covering the spending of my shopaholic sister-in-law. Every thankless chore in that house fell to me. My husband, Michael, was spineless. But I loved him, and I didn't want to worry my aging father back in Ohio, so I clenched my teeth and bore it all. And then, the fateful day arrived. That afternoon, while I was preparing dinner, a call came from my aunt. Through the phone, I could hear her choked sobs. "Sarah, you need to come home. It's your father. He's gone." In that moment, the world went silent. The phone slipped from my numb fingers, clattering onto the linoleum floor. My father, but he had just called me yesterday, reminding me to eat well. How could this be? My aunt explained he'd been in a car accident on his way back from the market. My world shattered. I collapsed, screaming, a sound of pure agony I never knew I possessed. The pain of losing my only family was worse than being stabbed by 1,000 knives. But as I was drowning in that grief, my mother-in-law and sister-in-law returned home. Seeing me on the floor, Patricia offered no comfort. She just frowned. "What is it now? Why are you making such a racket in my house?" Just then, my husband Michael came home from work and rushed to help me up. My dad is gone, Michael," I sobbed. I expected, in a moment like this, that they would show at least a shred of human decency. I was wrong. Patricia just clicked her tongue. "Is that all? Old people die. What's the big fuss? Stop your wailing, and get dinner on the table. It's bad luck. I have to go home. Now. I have to see him one last time," I said, tears streaming down my face as I tried to stand. But Patricia blocked my path. "Go where? Don't you know tomorrow is the first anniversary of your father-in-law's death? You're the eldest son's wife. You think you can just abandon your duties here to prepare for the memorial? But this is my father's funeral." I screamed. "He just died. How can I not go? Don't you dare raise your voice to me." Her eyes blazed. I said no, and I mean no. You take one step out that door, and you'll regret it. Then she turned to her son and uttered the words that will haunt me for the rest of my life, words that no human being should ever say. Michael, break her leg, if you have to. She is not leaving this house. I froze, paralyzed. How could anyone be so monstrous as to say such a thing to a daughter-in-law grieving her father? But what truly horrified me was my husband's reaction. He hesitated for only a moment, then, instead of defending me, he nodded. Mom's right, you're not going anywhere. Are you insane? I stared at him in disbelief. He said nothing more. He just walked toward me and grabbed my arm roughly. I'm sorry, Sarah, but I can't go against my mother. With that, he began to drag me. He didn't hit me, but he pulled me forcefully toward the small door that led to the damp, unfinished basement where they stored old junk. No, let me go. You're animals. I screamed, kicking and fighting with all my strength. He swung open the basement door and, without a flicker of hesitation, shoved me into the darkness. Crack. The heavy metal latch fell into place. The sound of the bolt sliding shut echoed with cold, final cruelty. I was a prisoner, locked in a dark, damp basement by my own husband, simply because I wanted to attend my father's funeral. I pounded on the door, I screamed, I begged. But the only response was a chilling silence, punctuated by the mocking laughter of my sister-in-law from upstairs. Have fun down there with the rats, sweetie. I collapsed onto the cold, dirt floor, my body trembling. The musty smell of mold and rodent droppings filled my nostrils. The pitch-black darkness enveloped me. I was in the deepest pit of despair. My father was gone, and now I had been utterly abandoned by the people I had called family. But then, in the heart of that despair, I heard a small, whimpering sound from just outside the door. Mommy? Mommy, where are you? I'm scared. It was my son, Leo. My 6-year-old boy. He must have seen everything. I scrambled toward the door. Through the thin crack at the bottom, I could see his little legs trembling. Leo, sweetheart. Mommy's here. I'm in here, I whispered. Mommy. Hearing my voice, he burst into tears. Why are you in there? Grandma and Daddy won't let me open the door. Fresh tears streamed down my face. Leo, baby, be a brave boy. Stop crying and listen to Mommy very carefully. I knew this was my only chance. I need you to sneak into the living room. Mommy's phone is on the coffee table. Take it and go outside. Then I need you to call Mr. Davis. Tell Mr. Davis that Grandma and Daddy locked Mommy in the basement, and he needs to come and help me. Quick, can you do that for me? Yes, I can. His voice, though still shaky, was firmer now. Go now, son. Be quiet, don't let them see you. As I heard his little footsteps scurrying away, my heart pounded with a mixture of terror and a fragile sliver of hope. I curled up in the darkness, praying my little boy could complete his mission, praying Mr. Davis would come in time. Upstairs, those monsters were probably congratulating themselves, never dreaming that the wail of police sirens would soon be screaming right outside their front door. After my son ran off, a dead silence fell over the basement once more. But this time, it was no longer filled with despair. A tiny ember of hope had begun to glow in the darkness. I leaned against the cold, damp wall, straining to hear any sound from outside. Time crawled by at an agonizing pace. Every second felt like an eternity. I had no way of knowing if Leo had made the call, if anyone was coming. All I could do was wait. Upstairs, the sound of the TV droned on, occasionally punctuated by the laughter of my mother-in-law and sister-in-law. They were oblivious, lost in their own world of selfishness and cruelty, unaware of the storm about to break over their heads. An hour might have passed when I heard my son's crying erupt from upstairs. I want my mommy. Open the door. I miss my mommy. My heart sank. He must have lost his nerve. Patricia's sharp voice cut through the air. Your mother is being punished. If you cry one more time, I'll lock you in there with her. His crying gradually subsided into frightened whimpers, and then silence. My heart ached as if it were being sliced by a knife. I was losing hope. Maybe Leo couldn't make the call. Maybe Mr. Davis was too busy, too far away. Maybe I was doomed to stay in this darkness while my father was being laid to rest without his only daughter by his side. Tears of helplessness and pain began to fall again. But just then, at my lowest moment of despair, a sound both familiar and utterly alien to our quiet street cut through the night. Wee-woo, wee-woo. The wail of a police siren, distant at first, grew rapidly closer, louder, until it stopped directly in front of our building. For a moment, I was stunned. Then, a wave of sheer elation washed over me. He came. He actually came. Upstairs, the siren caused a commotion. The TV went silent, followed by frantic footsteps. What's going on? Why are the police here? It was Patricia's voice. A moment later, the doorbell rang, loud and insistent. NYPD. Open the door. I heard Michael open the door, his voice flustered. Yes, officers, is there a problem? We received a report of an unlawful imprisonment at this address. A deep, authoritative voice boomed. I recognized it instantly. It was David Davis, my father's lawyer and lifelong friend. Is Sarah Thompson here? Yes, she's here. But Michael began to stammer out a lie. My wife, she's been mentally unstable. We were just trying to calm her down. Mentally unstable, you say? Mr. Davis's voice was cold steel. All the more reason for us to see for ourselves. Step aside. I heard the heavy tread of several people entering the apartment. Sharp commands and questions flew. What do you think you're doing? This is private property. Where is Mrs. Thompson? Tell us now. I couldn't wait any longer. I summoned all my remaining strength and pounded on the steel door. Help me! I'm in here. Help! My voice immediately drew their attention. The sound is coming from the basement. Breach the door. Now. Crash! Crack! Hammers and heavy kicks slammed against the door. The old lock gave way in seconds. As the door flew open, the sudden flood of light blinded me, and I had to shield my eyes. The first thing I saw was the worried face of Mr. Davis, flanked by uniformed police officers. Sarah, are you alright? He rushed in and helped me to my feet. A moment later, my son Leo ran past them and threw himself into my arms, sobbing, Mommy, Mommy. I hugged him tightly, tears of relief pouring down my cheeks. I was finally free. When the officers helped me upstairs, the scene was one of controlled chaos. My mother-in-law, husband, and sister-in-law were huddled in a corner, their faces ashen. As soon as Patricia saw me, she began to play the victim. Oh, my heavens! My daughter-in-law has truly gone mad. She locked herself in the basement and is trying to frame us. Officers, please don't believe a word she says. But her act was useless. Mr. Davis simply nodded to one of the officers, who played a recording from his phone. Mr. Davis? Mommy says Grandma and Daddy locked her in the basement. Leo's small, frightened voice filled the room. It was irrefutable proof. Patricia's mouth snapped shut. Michael and Jessica stared at the floor, unable to look at anyone. A detective stepped forward grimly. Michael Miller, Patricia Miller, you are under arrest for unlawful imprisonment. This is a felony offense. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can, and will be used against you, in a court of law. 2 pairs of cold, steel handcuffs clicked shut around their wrists. Patricia, the absolute tyrant of the household, was now trembling like a leaf, her face a ghastly shade of gray. She could never have imagined her momentary act of cruelty would lead to this. Michael looked utterly broken. He stared at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of confusion and a silent, pleading question. You really called the cops on your own husband? Jessica was frozen in place, watching her mother and brother being led away, the arrogant smirk wiped from her face forever. In a matter of hours, the hunters had become the hunted. They were bewildered, unable to comprehend how I, the poor orphan girl from Ohio, could possibly wield such power. After Michael and Patricia were taken away, the cramped apartment felt strangely empty and cold. Jessica was curled up on the sofa, sobbing. I felt no pity for her. This was the price for her cruelty and mockery. But in that moment, I couldn't spare a thought for them. Only one agonizing reality clawed at my heart. My father is gone. Mr. Davis, I said, turning to my father's old friend and lawyer. My voice was thick with grief. I have to get to him. I have to go to my father. Mr. Davis looked at me with eyes full of sorrow and apology. I'm so sorry, Sarah. We're lucky Leo was smart enough to remember my number and call. It was a close call. He ruffled the hair of my son, who was still clinging to me, his face pale. You did a good job, Leo. You saved your mom. I held my son tighter. He had endured a terrifying night, but in doing so, he had become my hero. Let's go, Mr. Davis, I said with determination. We have to leave right now. He nodded. Everything's arranged. The car is waiting downstairs. We'll head straight to Ohio. I packed nothing. I didn't want a single item from that hellish place. Holding my son, I walked out the door with Mr. Davis, leaving behind 4 years of resentment and pain, but my heart felt no victor's joy, only the profound sorrow of a daughter on her way to bury her father. A black Lincoln Town car cut through the darkness, leaving the chaotic city behind as we sped toward my hometown. During the 5-hour journey, I barely spoke a word. I held my sleeping son and stared out the window as memories of my father flooded my mind, as vivid as if they had happened yesterday. Him carrying me on his shoulders as a little girl, helping me with my homework late into the night, beaming with pride when I got into college. And on my wedding day, his eyes red-rimmed, squeezing my hand and saying, "You have to be happy, my girl, but if things ever get hard, you can always come home to Dad." And now, I was going home to him. Not for comfort, but to say a final farewell. And I had failed to be there at the end. The thought was a physical weight on my chest, and the tears began to fall again, silently, endlessly. Dawn was breaking when we reached the outskirts of town. A pall of sadness hung over the entire community. From a distance, I could hear the sounds of mourning. A white tent was set up in front of my father's small house. Many relatives and neighbors were already there. As Leo and I got out of the car, they rushed toward us. My aunts enveloped me in their arms, their wails mirroring the grief in my own heart. "Sarah, where have you been? Your father passed without getting to see you one last time." My legs gave out. I collapsed, crawling on my hands and knees toward my father's portrait. In the photograph, he wore his usual warm, kind smile. But why did my heart feel like it was being ripped to shreds? "Dad," I wailed, pressing my forehead to the floor before his picture. "Your bad daughter is finally here. Dad." The dam of my emotions broke, and a torrent of pain, guilt, and every suppressed feeling from the last 4 years poured out. In the days that followed, I let go of everything else. I didn't think about my in-laws, the betrayal, or the need for revenge. My only focus was on fulfilling my duty as a daughter and giving my father the proper, loving farewell he deserved. Mr. Davis was by my side through it all, not just as a lawyer, but as a true uncle and family member. He handled all the arrangements, greeted the mourners, and shielded me from the logistical burdens, allowing me to spend those last precious moments by my father's side. His burial took place on a drizzly afternoon. Watching his casket being lowered into the earth, my heart felt like it was shattering into a million pieces. "Goodbye, Dad. You're really leaving me now. Please rest in peace. Your daughter isn't weak anymore. I'll live a strong life. I'll raise Leo well, and I will make them pay for what they've done." That tear-soaked return home was not just an ending. It was a new beginning. It washed away the weakness within me and ignited a fire of strength and resolve. I knew that after laying my father to rest, another battle was waiting for me, the fight for justice. The funeral was over. After days spent in a haze of sorrow, I slowly began to regain my composure. The ache of losing my father was still a raw wound in my heart, but I couldn't afford to crumble. I had my son, and a long road ahead. My plan was simple. Once everything in my hometown was settled, I would return to the city with Leo, find a new job, and start a simple, quiet life, just as my father had lived. I had no intention of ever returning to the family that had treated us with such cruelty. But sometimes, life presents a turn you could never have anticipated. The time had come for a secret my father had kept for decades to finally be revealed, and it would change the course of my life forever. A few days after the burial, Mr. Davis came to see me. This time, he came in his official capacity as the executor of my father's will. He said there were some important matters in the will that needed to be formally announced. A small family gathering was held in my father's old house, attended only by me, Leo, Mr. Davis, and a few close relatives, who had always been kind to us. I assumed it was just a formality. My father was a retired teacher, with a small pension. I thought his only assets were this old house and a small savings account for his retirement. With a very solemn expression, Mr. Davis opened his briefcase and carefully took out a sealed bundle of documents. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began in a low, clear voice, "I stand here today as the entrusted executor of the last will and testament of the late Henry Thompson, Sarah's father." He carefully broke the seal and began to read each clause of the will aloud. The first few parts were unremarkable. My father left words of thanks to his siblings and relatives. The old house was to go to my aunt, who had helped raise me. The small savings account was to be divided equally among his nieces and nephews. And then, Mr. Davis reached the final, most crucial section. What he read next sent a shockwave through the room, stunning everyone, especially me. Finally, regarding my personal assets under the name Henry Thompson, all assets, including a 100% stake in the Sterling Group, the Regency Hotels and Resorts chain, and all real estate and bank accounts under my name, my ears were ringing. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The Sterling Group, Regency Hotels, these were titans of industry, names anyone in the financial world would recognize, a multi-billion-dollar real estate and hospitality conglomerate. How could my father be connected to them? He was a simple, retired teacher living in a rustic old house. Mr. Davis continued reading in a measured tone. "I bequeath all of the aforementioned immense assets to my sole heir, my daughter, Sarah Ann Thompson." It was the first time I had heard my full name spoken with such gravity, but I couldn't process anything else. The room felt like it was spinning. Multi-billion dollars. Sole heir. The words were so unreal they felt like something out of a dream. My relatives were just as shocked as I was. They looked back and forth between me and Mr. Davis, their faces a mask of disbelief. The poor, kind Mr. Thompson they had known was, in fact, an anonymous tycoon, and their niece Sarah, for whom they had felt pity for her difficult marriage, had just become one of the wealthiest women in the country overnight. After he finished reading, Mr. Davis explained everything. My father, Henry Thompson, was not just a retired teacher. He had been a teacher, but that was over 30 years ago. After my mother died, he left me in the care of my aunt and went into business by himself. With a brilliant business mind and a bit of luck, he quickly found success, building a vast real estate empire. However, my father was an intensely private man. He disliked fame, glamour, and the media spotlight. Most importantly, he feared that wealth would have a negative impact on my upbringing. He was worried I would fall in with the wrong crowd, or be hurt by people trying to get close to me for his money. He wanted me to grow up like a normal child, to understand the value of hard work, and to find true happiness untainted by materialism. So he created the perfect cover. He kept the old house in our hometown, and whenever he visited, he lived a modest, frugal life. He sent me just enough money for tuition and living expenses, telling everyone it was from his meager pension. To everyone, including me, he was just an old, retired teacher living off his daughter's support. Only a few of his closest confidants, like Mr. Davis, knew his true identity. As I listened to Mr. Davis's explanation, tears streamed down my face. But this time, they were not tears of pain, but of boundless gratitude and love for my father. Behind his simple, hard-working facade was a monumental sacrifice and a profound love for me. He may not have dressed me in silks and jewels, but he gave me something far more precious: a peaceful childhood and a character uncorrupted by money. The truth of my identity was revealed in the most unexpected way. From the daughter-in-law despised by her in-laws for being from the country and locked in a dark basement, I had, overnight, become one of the wealthiest women in America. It felt like a twist of fate, but I knew this wasn't just a gift from the heavens. It was a heavy responsibility my father had entrusted to me, and I had to learn how to carry it. My father's will opened an entirely new chapter in my life, one I had never even dared to dream of, but at the same time, it forced me to look back at my entire past, at the 4 bitter years of my marriage. When I decided to marry Michael, I was filled with romantic ideals. I believed that with love, we could overcome any hardship. I wanted to build a simple, warm family with him, and Michael, with his unassuming and earnest demeanor as an ordinary office worker, made me believe it was possible. He wasn't flashy or eloquent. He won my heart with sincerity and small acts of kindness. He brought me soup when I was sick, stayed up all night to build me a bookshelf by hand. He loved me, a simple girl with an old father in a small town. I was intoxicated by a love I had longed for. When I announced my decision to marry, my father wasn't thrilled. With his life experience, he saw something unsettling in Michael. There's something about him that doesn't seem genuine, Sarah, he told me. There's a calculating look in his eyes that I don't like. But blinded by love, I didn't listen. For the first time in my life, I argued with my father. I told him he was being too suspicious, that he didn't understand true love. I begged him to let me choose my own happiness. He sighed and finally gave in. If you're happy, then that's all that matters. But promise me one thing. If anything ever happens, even the smallest thing, you call Mr. Davis immediately. He will look out for you in my place. From the first day I moved in, my mother-in-law, Patricia, made sure I knew my place. She was not impressed by a girl whose father was an old teacher from Ohio. She felt I was beneath her son, who had a stable job in New York City, and she made her contempt clear in every word and action. The apartment we lived in was a cramped two-bedroom, but in her eyes, it was a palace, and I was blessed just to set foot in it. I bet you've never lived in such a nice place back in the sticks, she said with a sneer on my first day. And so began my life as an unpaid maid. From cleaning and laundry to preparing meals for four, everything was my responsibility. Patricia spent her days watching TV or gossiping with neighbors, while my sister-in-law Jessica, under her mother's protection, didn't lift a finger. My husband Michael would come home from work, toss his briefcase aside, and sit down at a table that was already set. I didn't complain. I thought it was natural for a new daughter-in-law to be diligent. But my efforts were never appreciated. Instead, they became ammunition for their nitpicking and nagging. The soup I made was never to her taste. Why is this stew so watery? Are you trying to poison us? The roast beef was tough as leather. The places I cleaned were immediately inspected by her, running a finger along a surface. Look, still dusty. Can't you do anything right? They didn't just criticize me, they controlled my entire life. I had to report where I was going, who I was with, and what I was doing. If I was 5 minutes late from work, I was interrogated like a criminal. My clothes, my hair, everything was a target for their criticism. Where are you going dressed like that? Trying to pick up some guy? And my husband, the man I loved, where was he during all of this? He never said a single word to defend me. His silence was a tacit agreement. Sometimes, he even sided with his mother and sister, scolding me. Sarah, just be patient. Mom only says these things because she cares. And you should try to dress a little more modestly. His weakness and silence hurt me more than 1,000 of his mother's rebukes. I was alone and powerless in my own home. Many times, I wanted to call my father and tell him everything, but I always stopped myself. I was afraid of worrying him, and I didn't want to admit I had made the wrong choice. That hellish life paused briefly when I became pregnant and gave birth to Leo. The arrival of a grandson seemed to please Patricia. Her nagging lessened, but their fundamental treatment of me didn't change. I was no longer just a maid, I was a baby-making machine. All my time and energy were consumed by caring for the child and serving the entire family. And Michael, he began to reveal a more patriarchal and abusive nature. He was no longer the kind, simple man I had married. He saw me as his property, someone who had to obey every command from him and his mother. He started becoming violent. First, it was verbal abuse. Then he started pushing me, even slapping me. I lived in fear but didn't dare to fight back. For my son, I thought if I made a scene and broke up the family, Leo would be the one to suffer the most. I clung to the hope that one day Michael would change, and I endured. But I was wrong. My patience only made him more arrogant. And on that fateful night, the night my father died, it was the final straw. His cruel act of locking me in the basement, just to obey his mother and selfishly prevent me from going to my own father's funeral, exposed the inhumanity of him and his family for all to see. Looking back now, I realize with bitter clarity that my marriage wasn't just a wrong choice, it was a trap. A trap set by a weak, chauvinistic man and his selfish, condescending family. And I, so desperate for two simple words "I love you," had walked right into it. After my father's funeral, and learning the truth about my identity, I knew I had a mountain of problems to resolve back in the city. But I didn't rush. I needed time for my grief to subside and to carefully plan my next steps. Mr. Davis handled all the legal procedures for me to officially claim my inheritance. After nearly a month of settling my father's affairs and getting a preliminary grasp on the operations of his company, I decided it was time to return to the city and end the mess my former in-laws had left behind. I was no longer Sarah Thompson, the powerless office worker. I returned with a new identity, a completely different person. Sarah Thompson, chairman of the board of the Sterling Group. I didn't go to the shabby old apartment they lived in. I was certain they would come to me. The news of my new status, that I was a wealthy heiress, would have undoubtedly reached their ears. And just as I expected, on the first day I moved into my father's mansion, they appeared. They looked utterly pathetic. Michael and Patricia, released from holding, looked haggard and 10 years older. Their clothes were rumpled, their faces drawn and lifeless. They were no longer the arrogant, condescending people who had insulted me. They looked like beggars pleading for charity. The security at the gate stopped them. They didn't dare cause a scene, simply bowing their heads and saying they wanted to see me. I instructed the guards to let them in, not into the house, but to a stone table in the garden. I wanted to maintain a necessary distance. I walked out, dressed in an elegant silk dress, my posture exuding confidence. It was a world away from the frumpy daughter-in-law they knew. When they saw me, both mother and son froze. They scanned me from head to toe with disbelief. They couldn't seem to accept that the woman they had trampled on and despised was now standing before them, beautiful, powerful, and utterly unreachable. Then, the performance I had anticipated began. Patricia was the first to drop to her knees. She grabbed my legs and wailed pitifully. "Sarah, my dear, I was wrong. This old woman lost her mind. I did terrible things to you. Please forgive me. Please tell the police to drop the charges. If something happens to my Michael, how will this old woman live?" she sobbed, pressing her forehead into the green lawn. Seeing his mother, Michael quickly followed suit, kneeling beside her. He didn't dare look me in the eye. "Sarah," he said, his voice cracking, "I know I have no right to say this. I'm a monster, the worst man in the world. I was abusive to you, cruel to you. I don't have the nerve to ask for your forgiveness. Just for our son, Leo. Please, just one more chance." He was using my only weakness, my son. "Leo needs a complete family, doesn't he? With a mother and a father." He continued in a tormented voice. "These few days without you and Leo, I realized I can't live without you both. I still love you, Sarah. I really do. Everything that happened was because I was weak and just listened to my mom. It was my fault. Please, give me a chance to start over. Can't we? Can't we get back together? I'll work like a dog for you for the rest of my life to make it up to you. I'll be good to you. I'll never hurt you again." I stood there silently, listening to it all. Patricia's pleas, Michael's belated confession. To me, it was all hollow, hypocritical noise. Love me? If he had loved me, he wouldn't have locked me in a basement to keep me from my father's funeral. They weren't regretting their cruelty. They were afraid of my power, of jail, and of the future they would lose now that they'd thrown away the winning lottery ticket they never knew they had. I looked at the two of them, kneeling before me, putting on their tearful performance. I remembered that terrifying night in the dark basement. I remembered my pain, my despair, and my heart hardened, no longer capable of being swayed. "Get up," I said calmly. "You can stop the performance now." They looked up at me, their eyes holding a flicker of hope. "You said this was all for your son?" I looked at Michael and gave a cold smirk. "Let me ask you, then, when you were locking his mother in the basement, letting her scream while he cried outside, were you thinking of your son then? When your mother and sister insulted his mother, were you thinking of your son? Don't you dare use my child as a shield to cover your own cowardice. You don't have that right." Michael's face went pale. He couldn't answer. "And you, ma'am?" I said, Turning to the kneeling woman, you say you're sorry. Are you sorry for being cruel to me? Or are you sorry you didn't know I was the daughter of a billionaire chairman? She, too, was silent. Their silence was the clearest answer. It's too late for all of this. My voice turned to ice. My forgiveness is not some cheap commodity you can buy with a few crocodile tears. You committed a crime. Now it's time to pay the price. Michael and Patricia's silence in the face of my piercing questions was a confession more potent than any words. It stripped away their pretense, revealing the hypocrisy and vile calculations hidden behind their tears. They felt no remorse, only fear. And I would never grant forgiveness to those who were incapable of remorse. I looked at the two of them, still kneeling on the lawn, their expressions shifting from hope to despair. I no longer felt any pity, only a profound sense of exhaustion and disgust. I wanted this charade to end. Get up. My voice was no longer calm, but cold and authoritative. Your performance is over. Do not defile my father's home any longer. My words were like a splash of cold water. They staggered to their feet, their faces a mixture of confusion and humiliation. Sarah, Michael stammered, trying to grasp at a final straw of hope. I know you're angry, but please, just one more chance. A chance? I laughed. A sound sharper than a dagger. I gave you too many chances, Michael. I gave you 4 years. 4 years to learn how to be a responsible husband and father. 4 years to learn how to protect your wife from the nagging of your mother and sister. 4 years to learn how to respect the person you vowed to spend your life with. And what did you do? You were silent. You sided with them. And in the end, you locked me in a basement. You stole my right to fulfill my duty as a daughter. After all that, you still think you deserve another chance? Every word I spoke was a needle pricking his cowardice and guilt. He hung his head, unable to look at me, unable to offer a single excuse. I didn't want to waste any more time. I spoke to a security guard standing nearby. Go inside and get the file from my desk. The guard moved quickly, returning minutes later, with a blue folder. It contained the divorce agreement Mr. Davis and I had prepared. I took the folder and walked up to Michael. Instead of throwing it in his face, I placed it quietly in his hands. This is what you get, the divorce papers. Both Michael and Patricia were aghast. They couldn't let this golden goose go so easily. He yelled, I don't agree. You're still my wife, the daughter-in-law of this family. If you want a divorce, you have to give me half of your assets. I let out a bitter laugh at the greedy performance of the man I had spent 4 years with. If you don't agree to the divorce, I will press charges for unlawful imprisonment. You'll probably serve a couple of years in prison. After that, the court will grant my divorce petition quite easily. Is that what you really want? I flipped to the last page of the agreement and pointed to a clause printed in bold. Michael Miller fully and irrevocably relinquishes all parental rights to his son, Leo Thompson. He shall have no contact, pay no child support, and hold no rights or responsibilities regarding the child until the child reaches the age of 18. In exchange, I, Sarah Thompson, will drop all charges against you and Patricia Miller for the act of unlawful imprisonment. This was my counterattack, not aimed at money, but at the very thing he had tried to use against me, his fatherhood. I knew Michael didn't truly love his son. He saw Leo as a tool, a shield, and now, I was taking that tool out of his hands. I was giving him a choice, a cruel choice between his freedom and his own son. No, you can't do this, Michael screamed. It was the first time I had ever seen him resist so vehemently. Leo is my son. You can't do this. You can't sever our relationship. Father-son relationship? I scoffed. Where was your fatherly love when you locked his mother in the basement and let him cry outside? Where was your fatherly love when your mother and sister insulted and demeaned his mother? And where was your fatherly love when you used that very son as a shield to beg for forgiveness for your sins? Mr. Miller. Each of my questions was a hammer blow against his hypocrisy. He fell silent, unable to speak. Think carefully, I said without a trace of mercy. On one side, you have your freedom and your future. On the other, you have parental rights on paper, to a son you've never truly cared about. You have one choice, sign it, or go to jail. You don't have much time. With that, I took my son's hand and went back into the house, leaving them with their cruel ultimatum. I knew, given Michael's selfish and cowardly nature, which option he would choose. And that was the most fitting punishment I could ever devise for him. The choice I presented to Michael was the cruelest test of his so-called fatherly love. I left him and his mother in the garden with the divorce papers and a pen. I didn't go far. From behind the curtain, Mr. Davis and I watched them silently. I wanted to see with my own eyes what final decision he would make between his freedom and his own son. And I didn't have to wait long. An ugly argument immediately broke out between mother and son. A performance that laid bare all their selfishness and calculation. "No, I can't sign this," Michael cried, clutching his head. "Leo is my son. If I sign this, I'll never be able to see him again." "Are you an idiot?" Patricia snapped, her voice no longer mournful, only filled with terror. "If you don't sign, you're going to jail. Do you understand? Do you think unlawful imprisonment is a joke? If you go to prison, who's going to support me and Jessica? Do you want to see us starve?" "But Leo." "Leo what?" she hissed. "He'll be living in the lap of luxury with his mother. What do you have to worry about? Do you really think you could win a custody battle against her, with her family's resources? Get real, son," she continued in a calculating tone. "Just sign it for now. Accept her terms. We're lucky to just avoid prison. We can think about the boy later. He's my grandson. Where is he going to run? Once things quiet down, we'll find another way. With all that money, she won't be so heartless as to keep a father from his son forever. We'll go back then, beg a little, and she'll soften up. Then we can use the kid to slowly get our hands on some of that money. Do you understand, son?" Listening to their conversation, a chill ran down my spine. There was no remorse in their minds, only calculation. Taking one step back was merely a prelude to another attack. A much more despicable plan to use their own son, their own grandson, to extort money. And Michael, the devoted son, after a brief internal conflict, was ultimately persuaded by his mother's words. Selfishness and cowardice won out over the little fatherly love he had left. He chose his freedom. With a trembling hand, he picked up the pen. He glanced one last time toward the house, with a complex expression, then lowered his head and decisively signed the divorce papers, and with them, the clause that completely surrendered his parental rights. He accepted the terms, not out of any concern for me or our son, but because he had no other choice. After signing, mother and son left the estate without another word. They had gotten what they wanted: temporary freedom, and clung to the false hope that they could use us again later. They didn't realize that the moment Michael signed that paper, he was completely dead to me, and once I had made a decision, there would be no more chances for them to exploit. The next day, I kept my promise. I had the charges for unlawful imprisonment dropped. The case was closed, and Michael and Patricia were legally free. They must have breathed a sigh of relief, thinking the storm had passed, and now all they had to do was wait for their next opportunity. But they didn't know that dropping the charges wasn't an act of forgiveness. It was simply the end of an old game, and the beginning of a new one. A game where I wouldn't have to lift a finger. Because karma, and the consequences of their own actions, would drag them into a pit of ruin all by themselves. The real punishment was just beginning. After the divorce was finalized, I didn't waste a second. I decisively cut the last remaining ties to that family. I blocked their numbers, deleted all photos, and erased every memory. The 4 years of marriage were now a nightmare I wanted to forget forever. I started a new, peaceful, and free life with my son. Under the protection of my father's legacy and the guidance of Mr. Davis, I no longer paid them any mind. I didn't need to punish them myself. I knew that sometimes, karma works quietly but terrifyingly, like a law of nature. And for Michael and his family, that punishment came much sooner than I could have imagined. The very act of mercy I had shown them dropping the charges became the starting gun for their destruction. They had escaped the judgment of the law, only to fall into a more fearsome trap. The consequences of their own sins. The first blow fell on Michael's career. The series of shocks, the police investigation, the revelation of my true identity, the near-prison experience had completely shattered his psyche. He could no longer focus on his work. He was distracted, suffered from insomnia, and made a critical error on a major construction project. His miscalculation on the blueprints was so severe that a portion of the building had to be demolished and rebuilt, causing a massive financial loss for his company. This time, there was no one to protect him. The shadow of my father, who had likely been quietly ensuring his stability, was gone. The company, citing gross negligence, fired him immediately. He lost his stable job and his only source of income. News of his firing spread quickly, and it was a signal to the hyenas waiting in the wings. His gambling debts. Michael was now a jobless deadbeat, and their patience had run out. The second blow struck. One afternoon, as Patricia and Jessica sat glumly in their apartment, a group of rough, tattooed men burst in. At their lead was a burly man with a scar across his face, one of Michael's biggest creditors. "Where's Michael Miller?" he roared, his voice shaking the small apartment. "Get him out here now." Patricia and Jessica turned white. "He's not here right now," Patricia stammered. "Not here?" the man sneered. "He can hide today, but he can't hide forever. Listen up, he owes me $500,000. He's been dodging me for 6 months. If I don't see the money today, don't blame me for what happens next." $500,000. The number stunned Patricia and Jessica. They knew he had debts, but they never imagined it was that much. We really don't have any money," Patricia pleaded. "Please, just give us a few more days. Time." The loan shark laughed. "Do I look like a charity? If you can't pay with cash, you pay with your property." With that, he and his men began to smash everything in the apartment. The TV, the sofa, the refrigerator, everything of value was destroyed. They even took the small amount of cash Patricia had hidden away. That was only the beginning. In the days that followed, their home became a revolving door for thugs. When one crew left, another arrived. They were subjected to constant threats, their apartment was vandalized, and their door was spray-painted with obscenities. Patricia and Jessica lived in a state of constant terror. They didn't dare leave the house or call the police, fearing even worse retaliation. They were now experiencing the same helplessness and fear that I had endured, the feeling of having no one to protect them. The chaos and terror drove them to a dead end. Hunted by loan sharks, Michael could no longer stay in hiding. He had to return to the mess he had created. The apartment was in ruins, and his mother and sister were cowering in a corner, paralyzed by fear. When she saw him, Patricia, the mother who had always coddled him, finally exploded. She flew at him, hitting and scratching him, screaming like a mad woman. "You worthless creature, look what you've done to this family. Addicted to gambling, buried in debt, and now gangsters are threatening to kill us all. Will you be happy when your mother and sister are dead?" Being hit by his mother for the first time in his life, Michael just stood there, taking the blows without resistance. He knew it was all his fault. After a long bout of crying and screaming, Patricia collapsed into a chair, exhausted, but her blind maternal love resurfaced. As much as she hated her son, she couldn't let the loan sharks kill him. "Tell me," she asked, her voice softer, "how much is the total debt?" I'm not sure. With all the interest, it's probably close to $5 million. $5 million? The number was another lightning bolt crashing down on their heads. They froze. They didn't even have $5,000, let alone $5 million. "Where in God's name are we going to get that kind of money?" she wailed again. They considered every option. Borrowing from relatives. No one wanted anything to do with them. Begging me? They knew it was impossible. They were completely trapped, and in that despair, Patricia made a final, agonizing decision. "All right," she said, her voice weary and resigned. "There's one last thing we have left." "What is it, Mom?" Michael and Jessica looked up with a glimmer of hope. "Our old family home," she said, her voice choking. "The homestead our ancestors left us. It's the last asset we have. We'll sell it to pay your debts. We have to save our lives first. We can earn back a house, but we can't earn back our lives." The house was where they were born and raised, a place filled with memories. It was Patricia's last shred of pride. Selling it was like cutting off a piece of her own flesh. But upon hearing his mother's words, Michael's face, instead of showing gratitude, twisted into a mask of horror. He went deathly pale and began to tremble. "What? What's wrong?" Patricia sensed something was terribly amiss. "No, It's nothing, Michael stammered, unable to meet his mother's eyes. What is it? Speak up. I still have the deed, locked away safely in my wardrobe, she pressed. In that moment, Michael could no longer hide it. He fell to his knees, grabbing his mother's legs, and let out a gut-wrenching sob. A terrible confession, a sin even more unforgivable than his gambling, finally burst from his lips. Mom, I'm so sorry. I'm not your son anymore. What are you talking about? Patricia cried in alarm. The deed. The deed to the house, he sobbed. I stole it. Over a year ago, I used it as collateral with a loan shark to cover my debts. A deathly silence fell over the room. Patricia and Jessica were frozen like statues, staring at Michael, as if they couldn't believe what they were hearing. The ancestral home, their last bastion of pride, their final hope, had already been gambled away by the very son, the very brother, they had loved and cherished so dearly. What did you just say? Patricia's voice was a barely audible, trembling whisper, but Michael just hung his head and sobbed. His silence was the most brutal confirmation, and in that instant, a scream tore through the silence. The proud, indomitable Patricia Miller, unable to withstand the successive shocks, finally broke. Her eyes rolled back in her head, foam frothed at her lips, and she collapsed to the floor, convulsing violently. A second, massive stroke had claimed her. Their downfall was complete. There was no recovery, no way back. Bankruptcy, ruin, the end of everything. It all began with two words: greed and indulgence. A son's greed and a mother's blind indulgence, a tragic combination that had created a bottomless pit of despair. Michael's horrific confession that he had gambled away even their ancestral home was the final blow that shattered Patricia's last ounce of hope and sanity. The second stroke was swift and brutal, stealing her ability to walk and speak forever. She didn't die, but she was trapped in a useless body, forced to watch as her family disintegrated around her fate. For a woman as proud as her, perhaps worse than death. The days that followed were a living hell for what was left of their family. Patricia was hospitalized, and Michael and Jessica, who had been sheltered their whole lives, scrambled to find money for her medical bills, but their reputation was ruined. No one, neither relatives nor friends, would help them. They were utterly alone. By the time Patricia was discharged, barely accustomed to a wheelchair, the creditors came for them. This time, it wasn't with threats or violence, it was with lawyers and legal documents. They had proof that Michael had defaulted on the loan for which the house was collateral. They were there to foreclose. Their pleas and tears were useless. Under the cold stares of officials and neighbors, all their belongings were thrown out onto the street. A heavy lock was placed on the door, and a cold, official repossession notice was slapped onto it. The house that was once Patricia's pride, a home filled with a lifetime of memories, was no longer theirs. They were completely broke. From a respectable home, the three of them became homeless overnight. They had to wander the streets, pushing their semi-paralyzed mother in a wheelchair, searching for a place to stay. Eventually, they found a tiny, single room in a dark, damp alley, a stark, squalid contrast to the life they once knew. From there, their miserable existence truly began. Patricia's health deteriorated rapidly after the shock. Not only was her body paralyzed, but her mind also became clouded. She was no longer the sharp, venomous woman she once was. She lay on a shabby bed, staring blankly into space, occasionally making unintelligible sounds and weeping, perhaps in rare moments of clarity, when she realized her blind love had destroyed her entire family. The full burden fell on Michael and Jessica. But how could these two, who had been raised like delicate flowers, withstand the hardships of life? Jessica, who had only known fashion and shopping, had to give up her designer clothes and fancy cafes. She tried to find a job, but with her poor education and ingrained laziness, she couldn't hold one down. She ended up as a worker in a garment factory, facing loud machinery and meager wages. The hardship and humiliation transformed her from a vibrant, arrogant young woman into a sullen, withdrawn person. The mocking smile that was always on her lips was replaced by a deep sigh. And Michael, his fate was the most miserable. He had not only lost everything but also had to bear the heavy burden of guilt. He took on grueling manual labor jobs to earn money while also having to care for his invalid mother. He had to clean her, feed her tasks he had never once imagined doing. The physical exhaustion, mental torment, and the contemptuous looks from the world turned him into a different person. He became rough and volatile, turning to alcohol to numb his pain. When drunk, he would curse and break things. He didn't curse me. He cursed himself, his mother, and his fate. Why? Why did my life turn out like this? It's all her fault. If she hadn't coddled me, hadn't encouraged me, I wouldn't have lost everything. My wife, my son, my money, all gone. Life in that cramped room was hell. The mother's groans, the son's curses, and the daughter's sighs all mingled into a symphony of ruin. I was no longer connected to them, but I would occasionally hear news of their situation from old acquaintances. Each time, a complex emotion stirred within me. It wasn't satisfaction. It was just a sad, pitiful feeling for the ruin of human lives. They had had everything, not wealth, but a comfortable family. But because of greed and arrogance, they had destroyed it all themselves. I thought that was their end, their final punishment, that they would live out the rest of their days in poverty and self-recrimination. But I was wrong. I had underestimated the depths to which a human being, pushed into a corner of despair, can sink. I didn't realize that the demon inside a desperate man, once awakened, can commit acts of madness beyond anyone's imagination. And Michael was about to do just that. 3 months had passed since my former in-law's bankruptcy. Life for my son and me had gradually settled into a peaceful rhythm. My new work at my father's company gave me not only financial stability but also a sense of purpose and confidence. Leo had adjusted well to his new school and environment. He was bright and cheerful, and the traumatic memories of that night seemed to have faded. I thought the storm had truly passed, that we could finally live in peace. But I didn't know that the demons of the past had not yet released their grip on us. They were watching, waiting for a chance to drag us back into hell. It was a Friday afternoon. I went to pick up my son from school as usual, but when I arrived, he was nowhere to be found. I asked his teacher, who also looked puzzled. That's strange. I just saw Leo playing on the playground a few minutes ago. Have you tried calling his GPS watch? My heart began to pound in my chest. A terrible premonition washed over me. I quickly opened the tracking app on my phone, and my blood ran cold. The red dot indicating my son's location was no longer at the school. It was moving very fast along a highway leading out of the city. No, I stammered. Someone has taken my son. Just then, my phone rang, an unknown number. With a trembling hand, I answered, "Hello?" There was silence on the other end for a few seconds. Then, a chillingly familiar voice, hoarse with alcohol and rage, spoke. "Hello, ex-wife. Long time no see." It was Michael. "Michael, what have you done to my son?" I screamed in terror. "Where is Leo? Where is my son?" He laughed, a dry, cruel sound. "Oh, our son is with me. He's being a very good boy. He's just wondering why he's going on a trip with daddy without mommy. What do you want?" I fought to keep my voice steady, but my entire body was shaking. "What do I want?" He laughed again. "I just want what's mine. You backed me into a corner, Sarah. Now it's your turn to pay." He paused, then spoke each word with cold, deliberate cruelty. $20 million. Wire it to the account I'm about to text you. You have 3 hours. If the money isn't in that account in 3 hours, you will never see your son again, and don't even think about calling the police. I have eyes everywhere. Your son's life is in my hands, Sarah. With that, he hung up. The phone fell from my hand. My legs gave out, and I crumpled to the ground. Kidnapping. He had kidnapped his own son. The cornered animal no longer had a human heart. He was using his own flesh and blood as a tool for extortion. $20 million. An impossible sum. 3 hours. What was I supposed to do? The fear of losing my son threatened to paralyze me. I wanted to scream, to fall apart. But then, the image of my father, the determined look in Mr. Davis's eyes, and the strength I had fought so hard to build, pulled me back from the brink. No, I can't break down. I have to be calm. My son needs me. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to think clearly. I knew I couldn't handle this alone. I immediately called Mr. Davis and told him everything. "Stay calm, Sarah. You must remain absolutely calm. His voice over the phone was like steel, but it also grounded me. Do not, under any circumstances, send the money. It will only put the boy in more danger. That man is desperate and unpredictable. Come to the police headquarters immediately. I'm calling my contact, Chief Grant, right now. We'll have a hostage rescue team assembled. Leave everything to us. Your job is to trust us. Do you understand? My throat was tight, but I nodded. This was the real war to get my son back, and this time, my opponent wasn't just a traitor, he was a wild beast, cornered and capable of anything. I rushed to the police headquarters, as instructed. A top-tier investigative unit was mobilized. They began tracing Michael's phone number and the signal from my son's GPS watch. A hostage rescue operation was planned in absolute secrecy. Every second that ticked by was torture. All I could do was clasp my hands and pray for my son's safety, and for that monster to face the full force of the law. The net of justice was being cast once more. The 3 hours Michael had given me were the longest and most tense of my life. I sat in the command center at the police headquarters with Mr. Davis and the police chief. I was surrounded by the most capable people, but my heart, the heart of a mother, wouldn't stop trembling. Every moment, the image of my son flashed in my mind, tightening its grip on my chest. Where are you, my baby? Are you scared? Are you crying? What if that monster hurts you? But I refused to be consumed by fear. I knew I had to be strong and calm. My son needed me, and the police needed my full cooperation. The hostage rescue plan was meticulous. Based on the GPS signal from Leo's watch, they quickly pinpointed Michael's location, a derelict single-room apartment in a dense, industrial part of the city. A SWAT team was immediately deployed, silently surrounding the area, creating an invisible net. The plan was not to storm the location. It was too risky and could provoke Michael, endangering Leo's life. The best strategy was to lure the tiger out of its den. And I was to be the bait. Following the chief's instructions, I called Michael back. Hello, Michael, it's me. I made my voice tremble with fear and helplessness. What? Is the money ready? He demanded impatiently. Yes, I have the 20 million, I answered, sobbing. But how am I supposed to transfer such a large amount? The bank will ask questions. I don't care, that's your problem. I'll get it in cash, I said, following the script. But I need to see my son first. I need to know he's safe. Just let me see him, even for a moment. Then I'll bring the money to you in person. There was silence on the other end for a few seconds, as the criminal's caution warred with his greed. $20 million in cash. The temptation was too great. Fine, he finally agreed. 1 hour. Meet me under the old highway overpass on the other side of town. Bring the money. Come alone. I'll let you see the boy. Don't try anything funny, or neither you nor our son will be safe. He took the bait. He had chosen a different location, a public place where he thought he would be safer, but he didn't know that wherever he went, the net of justice was already in place. An hour later, I was sitting in an unmarked car, clutching a large black duffel bag. Inside wasn't money, but stacks of blank paper with a few real bills on top. The bag was fitted with a tracking device and a miniature microphone. All around me, on the overpass above, below, and in the shops lining the street, dozens of plainclothes detectives were disguised as ordinary citizens, street vendors, and couples. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I scanned the area, desperately searching for my son, and then I saw him. An old motorcycle pulled up on the opposite side of the road. Michael was driving, and my son, Leo, was wedged between him and a stranger sitting behind him. Leo was wearing a hat pulled down low, but I recognized his small frame instantly. My heart felt like it was being torn apart. Mommy. Leo saw the car and started to struggle. The money, Michael yelled into his phone. Where's my son? Let me see him first. I screamed back, playing the part of a terrified mother perfectly. Open the car door and throw out the bag. Then I'll let him go. No, you release him first. Then you get the money. We argued back and forth over the phone. A tense exchange designed to buy the detectives more time to close in. Finally, confident that the area was clear, Michael's greed won. He signaled his accomplice, who pushed Leo off the motorcycle. Mommy, my son ran crying toward me. In that exact moment, A voice boomed through a megaphone. NYPD, nobody move. From all directions, the disguised officers swarmed in. Michael's motorcycle was instantly surrounded. He and his accomplice were tackled to the ground and handcuffed before they could even react. The door to my car opened. It was Chief Grant and Mr. Davis. "It's over, Sarah. He's safe," the chief said. I scrambled out of the car and ran to my son, who was already being shielded by a female officer. "Leo. Oh, my baby." I fell to my knees and wrapped him in my arms, sobbing with relief. He was finally safe. Michael was arrested on the spot. His face was a mask of shock and disbelief. He couldn't comprehend how his plan had been foiled so quickly, so perfectly. He had underestimated me, and he had underestimated the power of justice. The net had closed, and this time, there was no escape for the demon. The case of Michael kidnapping his own son for ransom was the final, devastating blow that shattered everything that was left of his family. The evidence was overwhelming, and the crime so heinous that the trial was swift. Standing in the defendant's box, Michael no longer looked human. He was gaunt, aged, and seemed to have lost his mind completely. He raved, he begged, and he blamed everyone but himself. His mother for coddling him, the loan sharks for backing him into a corner, and finally, me. He claimed my wealth was the root of all his sins, but no amount of deranged justification could help him. The court, considering all his crimes, unlawful imprisonment, mortgaging the family home under false pretenses, and the most severe charge, kidnapping for ransom, delivered a harsh sentence. Michael Miller was sentenced to 20 years in prison. 20 years. Nearly the rest of a man's life. He would pay for his cruelty and inhumanity within the cold walls of a prison cell. The sinner had met his rightful end, and his family, too, faced their own karmic retribution. When Patricia heard the news that her son had been arrested for kidnapping his own grandson, she completely broke down. The immense shock, coupled with her poor health, was too much. She passed away a few weeks later in that cold, single room, alone with her belated regret, dying with the knowledge that she had, with her own hands, destroyed the son she loved most. And Jessica, with her mother dead, her brother in prison, and no home to return to, was left all alone in the world, no longer able to depend on anyone. She was forced to face the hardships and struggles of life on her own. It was, perhaps, the most valuable lesson she would ever learn. The family that had once been so arrogant, so condescending, so dismissive of others, had finally, completely, imploded. Not because of me or anyone else, but from within. Their own sins, their lies, and their indulgence of evil had consumed them. After the trial, life for my son and me finally found true peace. I was no longer Sarah Thompson, the powerless office worker. I officially took over my father's business and became the chairwoman of the Sterling Group. I didn't choose a life of leisure. I wanted to use my strength and wisdom to continue and grow my father's life's work. I wanted to prove that a woman who has been knocked down can rise again, stronger than ever. I spent more time with my son, helping him heal from the trauma he had endured. I taught him about love and forgiveness, but also about the strength to stand up for himself and for what is right. My story, which began with cruelty and immense pain, finally concluded with the light of justice and a new beginning. I walked through the darkest basement of my life, but I did not break. I found my way out, not through a miracle, but through my father's love, my son's courage, and my own refusal to surrender. And I want to say this to every woman out there. Always believe in your own worth. Never give anyone, not even the person you love most, the right to trample on your dignity, your self-respect, and your rights as a human being. Abuse in any form is never acceptable, and silence is never the solution. Speak up. Seek help. You deserve to be loved, respected, and to live a peaceful, happy life on your own terms. A new dawn doesn't just arrive on its own. We have to fight our way through the darkness to claim it. My journey, filled with tears and fury, but also with strength, has finally reached its last chapter. The fires of anger have cooled, and the waves of hatred have receded. All that remains is the peace of a daughter, who has fulfilled her duties, and the relief of a mother, who has protected her son's future. Looking back, from the despair of that dark basement to where I stand today, firmly in the seat my father left for me. My heart is still a mix of emotions. The pain of betrayal will likely never fully fade. It's a scar on my soul, a reminder of a foolish, blind past, but that scar no longer hurts me. Now, when I touch it, I feel strength, growth, and a deep gratitude for a life that gave me the chance to rise again from the very place I fell. My story is perhaps the most expensive and brutal lesson on patience and blindness. In our culture, women are often taught the virtues of sacrifice. We are told to endure a little, to compromise, to take a step back for the sake of family peace. I believed it. I thought my endurance was a virtue, my sacrifice noble. I built a dam of patience, day by day. A nagging word from my mother-in-law was a brick. My husband's weakness was a layer of mortar. My sister-in-law's disdain was another stone. I diligently built this dam, telling myself that the higher and thicker it got, the more secure my peace would be. I failed to realize that a dam built with grievances and tears is destined to collapse. I was wrong. I had fatally confused patience with weakness. Patience is for overlooking minor mistakes in daily life, for understanding and empathizing with another's point of view. It's a precious virtue, but when patience becomes silence in the face of evil, in the face of actions that trample on your character and self-respect, it is no longer a virtue, it is weakness. My silence in the face of their malice didn't make it go away, it nurtured it, allowing it to grow into a monster big enough to swallow me whole. Michael's violence, the act of locking me in the basement, was not a random event. It was the inevitable consequence of my years of allowing them to disrespect and devalue me. The first lesson I learned with my youth is this: never build a dam of tolerance. Instead, create a red line of self-respect. Anyone who crosses that line, even the person you love most, must be pushed away. Because if you do not protect your own boundaries, no one else in this world will protect them for you. And my story is a painful lesson in blindness. Patricia's blind love for her son turned into an indulgence that excused all his sins. She was ready to trample on morality and the pain of others to protect her precious boy. But in the end, that blind love was the poison that killed her son's future. She didn't teach him to be a responsible man, only how to run away and blame others. Motherly love is sacred, but loving a child correctly is more important. It's not about giving them everything they want, but about teaching them right from wrong, and how to live with a sense of responsibility to themselves and others. It was also about Michael's blind sense of filial duty. His devotion to his mother was so warped that he lost all sense of right and wrong. When his mother told him to imprison his wife, he did it. He forgot that in marrying, he had created his own small family. His responsibility was to be a bridge between both sides, to find balance. His blind obedience destroyed his life. But the biggest lesson I want to share today is not about patience or blindness, but about the power that lies within each of us, and the importance of not remaining silent in the face of abuse. For 4 years, I swallowed every injustice alone. I was afraid to speak up, afraid of breaking up my family, afraid of my son losing a complete home. That very silence nearly killed me. It allowed evil to flourish. It was only when I was pushed into a corner, with nothing left to lose, that I finally found my voice. And as you saw, one small action by my son, one phone call made from my desperate plea, changed everything. The power of truth, when backed by the power of justice, is immense. It can break down any prison door and strip away all hypocrisy. So, if anyone listening, especially women, is going through a similar situation, enduring any form of domestic abuse, whether physical or emotional, I implore you, please, do not be silent. I know it can be terrifying to speak up. But the pain of living in silence and fear is far greater. Be brave. Reach out to people you trust. Believe in the power of justice. Go to your parents, siblings, or friends. Seek help from women's shelters or legal aid societies. The phone in your hand is not just for entertainment, it is a weapon to protect yourself. One call, one text message, can change your entire life. No one has the right to hurt you. My new morning has truly begun. A morning with no more tears or humiliation, only freedom, strength, and a heart that is learning to love itself and spread that love to others. I inherited my father's business not to enjoy a life of luxury, but to continue his dream, to create more value for society, and to help others in need. I share my story, my deeply painful personal experience, in the hopes of conveying a message of strength and courage. However, every situation is unique. This is not legal advice, nor is it an encouragement of any form of retaliation. If you are facing serious issues, especially domestic violence or complex legal matters, please seek professional help from lawyers, counselors, and relevant authorities. Your safety must always come first. My story ends here. A story that began with cruelty and ended with the light of justice. Thank you for listening, for walking with me, and for empathizing. I hope that my story, though sorrowful, can be a small source of comfort and motivation for anyone who feels weak and powerless. Remember, you are never alone, and you always have the right to choose, to stand up, and to reclaim your own happiness.